Sleeping through the fingers.
Yeah, did you say sleeping through the fingers?
Hi, I'm Chansey.
And I'm Lila.
And this is for Criming Out Loud.
So this week, me and Chansey, we both listened to this podcast, and it's great, especially if you're a fan of Dwight from The Office, because he is I guess you'd say he's the host. He doesn't really talk a whole ton through it. But anyway, it's called Radio Rental. So if y'all are interested in it, it's kind of spooky stories told by the people that experienced it. It's pretty cool. But we both heard this episode this week on there, and it piqued my interest, and that is what sparked this episode today. And if you're curious, you can go listen to episode 63 of Radio Rental, and there's the little backstory. We'll just dive right in today. We don't have anything else exciting to talk about, so we're just going to get there. Today we're talking about two prisoners that broke out of their prison and went on an insane killing spree. And by the time they were stopped, they had 11 victims across several state boundaries and had left complete fear and panic in their wake. And the name of these two men was Claude Eugene Dennis and Michael Lancaster. And they are truly evil men. The vilest of creatures, 100%. So, like I kind of said before I listened to that episode of the other podcast, I'd never heard of this before at all. And it's kind of crazy to me, honestly, that this isn't a bigger case, because they killed 11 people. Like, it wasn't just like a minor prison break. This was like a big deal. And they were
That's
like
a lot
a
of people.
they were like a major threat for like a month after breaking out. Have you ever heard of this case before?
No, I haven't. I hadn't heard of it till I listened to that Radio Rental episode.
There you go. So here we are. Okay, so we're going to start at the very beginning of the story, which is, why were Claude Eugene Dennis and Michael Lancaster in prison to begin with? So Dennis, he had been originally picked up for the murder of a man named Arthur Lake. Like, within like days of being accused of that murder, he had also been accused of the murder of two more people, John Witt and Mary Luttrell, which happened to be the current owners of the farm that he used to own, like Dennis. He used to own the farm. They were the current owners. He seems to have just killed these three people just because. There doesn't seem to be a whole ton of motive. He's just not a nice man. So
That's
he got thrown into
great.
prison, and for whatever reason, he was sentenced to 50 years, and the charge was technically ruled as first-degree manslaughter
Why?
for
He
his
murdered
crimes.
them.
I don't know. I didn't get a lot of detail on it, but that's what it was ruled as, and so he only got 50 years. Which, he could have gotten out in his lifetime, but he decided he was going to get out sooner than that. But we'll get to that in a minute. Lancaster, our second perp, he was in prison for armed robbery and was serving a sentence of 25 years. He was only 25 at the time. He was really young. But in his 25 years, he had already escaped the Oklahoma State Reformatory in 1970, and he'd also escaped from Cleveland County Jail. So he's done it before. He's gotten out of prison several times. And also, Dennis got out of prison before, because he escaped from Stevens County Jail in 1976, which is only like 2 years before this incident. So they were both already a flight risk. Yeah. It wasn't a surprise when you look at their history that they would have tried to escape again. So, in 1978, on charges of manslaughter for Dennis and charges of armed robbery for Lancaster. They both end up in the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in 1978. And both of these men, they get chatting with each other in prison, and they're like, we had unfair trials and we're getting out of here. And so they decide that they are going to use tunnels that already existed under the prison to get out, because the town the prison was located in, called McAllister, had many existing tunnels from its day as like a hub for coal mining. So it had this like network of tunnels underneath the streets already. What they found is that there was a pre-existing tunnel that was located in the abandoned power plant of the prison. So they found that. This, combined with the fact that the Oklahoma State Penitentiary was still recovering from one of the biggest prison riots in U.S. history, made for, like, I guess, easy access to freedom. And that prison riot in July of 1973 was huge. Like, the prisoners completely took over the prison. There had been 3 inmates that were killed by fellow prisoners. The infirmary had been set on fire, and the inmates had gotten complete control of the prison and had held hostages and made demands for several days. And by the time they were able to gain control of the prison again, there was $20 million worth of damage done to the prison.
Wow.
So when Dennis and Lancaster come on the scene, that's only like, 5 years later? And they have, like, the prison has not fully recovered. This prison was also known for being, like, extremely overstuffed with prisoners. There
A
was way
little
too
bit
many of them.
overpopulated.
Yeah, all the time. And it had actually been, like, a big concern in the area before this. So what they discovered was, like I said, there's already an existing tunnel underneath the prison, and all they had to do was dig through 30 inches of like a concrete plug. And so they did that on April 23rd of 1978 at around 3 p.m. They dug their way out to freedom.
30 inches is a lot of inches
Yeah.
of concrete
Yeah, it's
to
more than
dig
a
through. How do
foot.
you dig through that?
I don't
Do
know.
you just break it
They
with a
had tools,
sledgehammer?
so they're just, I guess, chipping away. I guess digging is probably the wrong term, but probably chipped away at 30 inches of a concrete plug. It's also really interesting because it was like in the abandoned power plant area of the prison, and I was like, what is that? Do most prisons have a power plant on campus? Like,
On
that seems odd
campus?
to me. I don't
I
know.
have no
And
idea how
anyway,
prisons work, but
I don't either. And I don't,
that's weird.
maybe I need to do some research on that sometime, but like, are prisoners just allowed? I mean, I don't think they're just allowed whenever all the time. And that's what's hard to me. It's like, how do you ever not notice that there's like a prisoner gone? But I guess it's like you have one prison guard to how many inmates? I don't know. So I guess
Yeah.
it
I
happens.
don't know.
But so they got out around 3 p.m. And after getting out successfully, they head to the home of Sam Keyes, which is a prison guard that lived only a few blocks away from the prison. It's interesting because they did do an investigation after all of this and did find one person on the inside that they think helped them escape. They got like tried and everything, but I can never find the name released. I don't know if they ever released the name of the guy. But to me, it seems very possible that it is this Sam Keyes. Elsewise, why are they heading to his house? How would they know where he lived?
I know,
It
that
does. It
seems
seems
odd.
like a really big coincidence that would happen randomly.
Yeah. That doesn't make very much
So
sense to me.
I would believe that he probably helped them. So they arrived at the Keyes home at around 4 o'clock, and they broke into the house to find Keyes' wife and 10-year-old daughter there. And one of them, I don't know if it was Dennis or Lancaster, threatened Mrs. Keyes with a knife, and the other decided to take advantage of the situation and stole a pistol, a 12-gauge shotgun, a rifle, and ammunition for all of the above firearms. Dennis and Lancaster then debated about taking the Keyes' daughter with them as a hostage, but Mrs. Keyes said basically, that will happen over my dead body. You will not be doing that. And a scuffle ensued. And the daughter was able to escape to a neighbor's house where she ended up calling the police and telling them that 2 men had her mom at knife point. And luckily, Mrs. Keyes was also able to escape to the neighbor's house, but the 2 convicts sped away in the Keyes' car, and the police did not get to the scene on time to stop them. You're going to notice a pattern as we go throughout their journey. They hop cars like nobody's business. I should have counted how many cars and vehicles they went through on their escape, but it is an insane amount of vehicles. So the car that they stole from the Keyes house was a blue Datsun. It was very common. It was a very common car in the area at that time, and it made tracking them down a lot more difficult because all they really had to go on was that they were in this blue Datsun, and apparently there was a ton of them. And so at this point, the Oklahoma State Penitentiary has been notified of the incident, and it has been asked to do a head count. And lo and behold, they realize that there is indeed 2 prisoners missing. And they find evidence that they've been planning this escape for some time. So, of course, a huge manhunt ensues, and for these 2 missing convicts, and they use dogs, they use helicopters, they got men on the ground, and they turn up nothing. The Keyes' car, would eventually be found near Holdenville, Oklahoma, in an area where a truck had also been reported missing, along with the owner of the truck. They don't actually find out anything about that until after this whole thing has been resolved, but they do about a month after the manhunt ends for these 2. They discover kind of the story behind what happened. They discover that the Datsun had been ditched in a barn in a town called Gertie, and that the owner of the truck, who had been reported missing along with it, I know, Gertie. It sounds like, I don't know what that sounds like. It sounds like something you'd name like an old cow.
Yeah, Gertie.
Yeah.
Maybe they named the town after their old cow, Gertie.
Maybe. It's very possible. I mean, it's fitting because, like, they had a ranch in Gertie, so it just seems like Gertie, where you have a ranch. Makes sense. Anyway.
An old cow.
Yeah, exactly. And an old cow. Anyway, so the owner of the truck, who was reported missing, like I mentioned, he was actually reported missing by his wife that same day. And like I said, this is not in real time. This is like a month later. This is them going back and filling in this blank. But what they find is that the owner of the truck, his name was Kenneth Sumner. He was 49 years old, and he had failed to return home from a trip to their Gertie Ranch, where they kept their horses and their cattle, and probably a cow named Gertrude. And this is where they found the Datsun. His body was never recovered, but they have to believe, based on the evidence and the fact that that Datsun that they had stolen was found there, they have to believe that he was probably the first victim of Dennis and Lancaster on their getaway. So then, for the next 6 days, they don't really know what happened to them. Their trail goes cold. They don't hear anything from them. At this time, people are terrified. They had heard stories of the brutality of these 2 men. They'd heard about them breaking into somebody's house and threatening them. And many people would leave the keys to their cars in their car in the hopes that they would just take the car and leave them alone. And others would leave food and supplies out on the porch, hoping for the same thing, just stay out of our house, just take what you need and go. We don't want you to freaking just kill us. And so it was everybody was really scared, and nobody wanted to go to their job. Nobody wanted to leave their homes. These guys were just really unpredictable.
That's pretty intense that people were so scared of these guys that they were just like, take all my food, take my literal automobile. I don't care. Just don't come in my house and kill me. That's
yeah,
how, and it was just all over.
Yeah, and as we go on, you're gonna see why, because honestly, I probably would have done the same thing. These these men were not messing around, and they did not care at all about anybody else. So, what they did find during this time was that there was a ton of break-ins and robberies, and although they can't 100% say that it was Dennis and Lancaster that were the ones to do that, they believe that it was them because it was along their route. And so there were several break-ins. They took pillowcases, lunch meat, bread, firearms, and ammunition. And they do think at least that the first break-in in this string had to be them because that first house was the house of Dennis's brother-in-law, and they stole his sawed-off shotgun. And while nobody saw them do it, it was like there was a clear connection. That was his brother-in-law's house, and they stole a weapon, which they probably used later on in their spree. So finally, on Saturday, April 30th, a week after not knowing where they were, they got a lead, and it was the worst kind of lead that nobody wants. They found the body of Kenneth Bobo, who was a 26-year-old from Garland, Texas. And his body had been covered/buried under some brush near Farmersville, Texas, and his car and fishing equipment were missing. This kind of starts a pattern that you're going to notice is like Dennis and Lancaster just need a getaway, and they don't really care how they get that getaway.
Well, and it's
So,
kind of like not only do they not care, they've been collecting weapons everywhere they go. Like they are
yeah,
not going back to prison alive.
no,
They're
no.
going to shoot
And
their way out of whatever situation they get into.
that's exactly what law enforcement that were involved on this case said, that like they knew that they had to kill them. That was the only way to stop them,
Yeah,
just based on
cuz
the way
they
that they
were
acted.
preparing for a fight. They weren't
Yeah.
going to just like hold out their wrists and be like, "You found me. Cuff me and take
Take
me
me
back to
in.
prison."
Yeah,
That
exactly.
wasn't the plan.
Exactly. So then on May 2nd, the stolen truck from um from Kenneth Bobo was seen at a Sigmore gas station. And at this gas station, Lancaster, he went in to ask for a pack of cigarettes. And of course, instead of paying for them, he held the cashier at gunpoint and demanded money from the cash register. This cashier's name was Matthew. He was 31 years old at the time. He stepped out around the counter, and Lancaster, with no mercy, shot him in the stomach and killed him. They took $100
Dang.
out of the register and they took off. Never looked back.
They
And
just like didn't
this is why
care.
people are terrified. Like these men, it's just like they come into contact with somebody and they kill them, and they have no remorse. It's like they just it's nothing to them.
That is really scary. I can see why people would be like, okay, if I can avoid coming in contact with these people, then I'm not going to die. So I'm just going to leave my stuff for them to get so that they can
Yeah.
just take it and run.
Yeah, and maybe then they won't like kill me for it. Yeah.
Because I never saw them. Can't be a witness if you're dead.
Yeah, exactly. So then 3 days later on May 5th is the next time that they hear from him. And this is what's like so baffling to me too, is it's like the police just cannot keep track of them. Like they'll kill somebody, they'll take their car, but they'll only hang on to it for like 2 days before they ditch it and they kill somebody else and take their car. And so the police just cannot keep track of them. They
They
just are
can't keep
like
up with it.
slippery. They just get away.
And it was a whole different world back then because these days there's cameras in everybody's house, on every street. You
Right.
can't just drive a car anywhere and just not be able to track somebody. But back then, that's
Yeah.
hard. That's harder
No, exactly.
to catch.
And so 3 days later, on May 5th, somebody else went missing in a small town in Texas on the Louisiana border. And this town was called Hemp Hill, and the missing man's name was James Dowdy. And he was a former railroad worker and was 57 years old. Another source said that he was a minister. but I only saw that one place, so I'm not sure. Maybe he was, but I was just going to throw that in there. He might have been a minister, which in my mind, I'm like, that means he's probably a pretty stand up guy. Even if he wasn't, he didn't deserve to die at the hands of these losers. But
Exactly. Super low to kill a minister, but it's super low to kill anybody.
and he's missing for weeks, but after a few weeks they confirm that he was another victim of this killing spree after he is found in a garbage dump. He had been killed from a gunshot wound to his head. These just hit me because it's like you hear about these and it's just things that you do every day. Like he had taken a load to the dump, like of garbage. He'd just gone to his local dump, like had some garbage at his house that he just needed to clear the clutter out. He'd just taken it out to the dump site and they had found him and killed him and dumped his body in the dump. And it's just like something you do every day. That shouldn't be dangerous.
But it was for
But
this guy
these
that one
Looney
time.
Tunes have no boundaries. And of course, Dennis and Lancaster, they steal his truck, and we can assume that's probably the reason they killed him, even though they didn't need to. On the night of May 10th, 5 days later, Dennis and Lancaster go into Rogers Sports Center in Denison, Texas. They go in waving a gun around, and they tell the attendant, whose name was Loretta Spencer, to open the cash register. Dennis, at the same time, ordered her husband, who also, they were the owners of this store, I'm pretty sure. His name was Bobby Lee, and he ordered him to go into his office in the back. Lancaster took all of the cash from the register, took a handful of cigarettes, then tied brass chains around Loretta's wrists and escorted her out to their pickup truck, the one that had been stolen. She was shoved into the back alongside 2 rubber rafts that were already inflated, clothing, and other camping equipment. And while she was laying there, she thought she heard the sound of the door slamming right before Dennis came out. But what she would find out days later was that was actually the sound of a gunshot that killed her husband, Bobby Lee.
My goodness, that's horrible.
So, super traumatic, obviously. And I can't imagine. I guess it's like a tender mercy that she didn't know in that moment that he wasn't okay, because that would have
That
been
would have made
even harder
it
as
worse.
she's getting kidnapped by these crazy people. They drove to the Red River Bridge, where Loretta was forced out of the car and was then tied to a tree. Dennis and Lancaster emptied the truck, and then Dennis took the truck like downstream to leave it there. They're going to take these rafts down the stream and dump the car. So while Dennis is gone, Lancaster tells Loretta that his name is Mike and that they're both escaped convicts. Which seems like I don't understand quite why he did that. I don't know if he was trying to inspire fear. I think she was already probably pretty scared.
Yeah.
I don't know like why he would like claim to be a convict, lie about his name, or like why he'd bring it up in general. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, she probably knows who you are because it's
Yeah,
all over the place. So why lie
exactly.
about your name
They've
and
killed
then
like 5
tell
people at
her?
this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why lie about half of it? Why lie about your name but then tell the truth about being an escaped convict? I don't get that.
Yeah. I don't know. Weird, but if she hadn't figured out who they were by then, I'm sure when he said that she 100% knew who she was dealing with. So when Dennis got back, they loaded their supplies and Loretta into the rafts and they head downstream. And during this 3-mile journey downstream, Loretta was sexually assaulted by Dennis. And when they stopped and got onto dry land, he raped her 2 times. So not only are these fools murdering scoundrels, but they're just straight up scum. Just
Like
scum,
the dirt on the bottom of my shoe. What a
basically.
horrible, horrible, horrible thing to do for no
Yeah,
reason.
exactly. And you can assume that's probably the only reason they took her, because they've killed
That's what I
like
was going to say.
everybody else up to this point. And I mean, I'm sure they were going to kill her too. But that night they make camp, they hide their gear, and they fall asleep, the 2 men. And Loretta She is a smart woman, and she does not go to sleep. She sits there trying to get out of her metal chain links that they tied her up with, and using her teeth, she's able to get out of it, and she hikes it to the nearby highway and is picked up by a passing driver and goes straight to the police station and tells them about what happened. And they in turn tell her the news that her husband was killed. And sadly, he had been found, like his body had been found only 15 minutes after they took her. And it's kind of sad to think about that, like, if whoever came to the store that short amount of time later, like, maybe they could have disrupted what was happening or changed the outcome. But sadly, Bobby Lee did not make it, but Loretta did. And that's the good news. She survived. So, due to the information that Loretta gave the police started to search along the riverbank because now they knew that they didn't have a car, but the only way that they could be traveling would be by the river. Sadly, those searches did not come up positive because Dennis and Lancaster were not complete idiots. They knew that Loretta would have told the police, and they ditched the boats, like the rafts, immediately and changed their plan altogether. They ended up walking through the woods and coming out on the other side into a neighborhood. And they approached a 15-year-old kid mowing his lawn. His name was Chris Bowling. They approached him. They kicked the door of his house open and pushed Chris inside. They forced him to lie down on the floor. They tied him up with electrical cable and then forced him to tell him the location of the keys to the truck that was parked outside. Once they had the keys, luckily, they left him tied up on the ground and told him if he came out of the house, they would blow his head off. But they didn't do that. He didn't move, and Chris Bowling survived the incident with them. Which, like, leads
Dang.
me to believe they have some qualms. It's like they're not going to kill, like, a 15-year-old kid.
I don't know.
But seems like they'll kill just about anybody else.
They probably
So,
would have, though, if he tried to stop them.
oh, they for sure would have. But it's interesting that they didn't just, like, straight up kill him and take the keys like
That's
they
true.
seem to do
Like
with
they did
most
the
other
other
people.
people.
Yeah. So they stole the Bowling's truck, and it was actually spotted several hours later. And the police tried to set up a roadblock, but somehow the truck never came through. They never saw the truck. So it's like another close call where it's like they could have had them,
But
and
they
they did
just keep
not.
sleeping through the fingers.
Yeah, did you say sleeping through the fingers?
I meant to say slipping, but it came out sleeping.
It was like,
My
just keep sleeping
goodness.
through those fingers. I agree.
Sleeping right through them.
um
Goodness gracious.
so later that evening, though, the evening of this roadblock, a woman named Judy Clement, she had a close call with them as well because they came knocking on her door. I would, at this time, I don't know, I would not have been answering doors. I would have been like, guys, I'm sorry, nobody's welcome at my house. I will not be answering the
Nobody's
door.
home. Try again
So,
later.
but she opens the door and they pulled a gun on her, and she just straight up refused to let them in. She was like, no, thank you, sirs. Turn around and get off my property. And she slammed the door in their face and locked it, and they just kind of ended up driving off. They just like left it at that. So I was like,
Wow.
well, okay then. It's interesting.
Appreciated her gumption.
Yeah, maybe. They should have, but I don't think that was it.
I
Probably were
doubt it.
just nervous about getting caught, but so then the next morning, after they had stolen this truck from Chris Bowling, it was found 12 miles away, abandoned again. So they once again, at this point, the police have no clue what they're driving. They have no clue how to find them. They just know that they're still out running amok, destroying lives, and they don't know what they're driving or any way to stop them. But on May 15th, they popped up again because they raided a gas station and stole a red Camaro. And 5 hours after the robbing, the police managed to pull them over in Butler, Alabama for a random traffic violation. And It's like so close to victory, but as the officer approaches the car, Lancaster gets out of the passenger seat and fires 5 shots at the officer. And luckily, those shots only wounded the officer in the shoulder and arm, but they got away.
That officer is
That
really
sucks.
lucky. 5
I know,
shots? That guy
like,
must be a terrible shot.
super. Yeah, I know. And a good thing, too.
I know.
So,
I'm glad for it.
2 days later, on May 17th, another cop, a state trooper, attempted to stop them as well. But they opened fire on his vehicle as he was chasing them, and they shattered his windshield and blew out his tire, and he couldn't pursue them anymore. So they once again escaped. Luckily, the state trooper was not injured at all. And he actually said in an interview that his wife was expecting a baby later that week. And in his words, the good Lord was riding with him that day, which I thought that was just kind of
Good
cute.
man.
I was like, yeah, that's right.
That's fun.
So, next lead that came was 2 days later. They really have like a thing here. It was like every two, I'm sure it was. I think they like every 2 days
Every 48
found
hours, it's time to get a new
another.
truck.
Yep. So on May 19th, a trailer was broken into near the Shalom Church near Whitfield, Alabama, and firearms, goods, and pillows were all stolen. The local law enforcement searched the area and they found the stolen Mercury that they had been driving. And I don't fully understand the situation, but they didn't approach the vehicle and instead called in for the fingerprints officers to come check it out. And afterwards, these officers that found the car, they said that they were sure that they were in the car and they were unsure why they didn't try to get out and like kill them and take off. And then on the flip side, I'm like, if you were sure they were in the car, why didn't you like call for backup and just like stop them right then and there? I don't know.
Instead of just letting them like drive away.
Yeah, but they didn't drive away. This is where it gets fuzzy, and I couldn't find any clarification on this because the next day the fingerprint officers show up and they confirm that it was their car. So I don't know if like they like called the fingerprints officers and then they just drove away and they're like, we'll just wait, see what happens to this car.
So like the guys weren't in the car.
Well, the officers that found it said that they were. They thought that they were in the car when they discovered it. And then so they were confused why they didn't ever get out of the car and try to like kill them.
Yeah.
So I don't get that.
I'm just confused.
I don't know if they were. I don't know if they were.
Okay. Well,
but
either way,
for whatever reason, the officers said that they thought they were there. I don't know.
Okay.
Who knows?
All right.
So
interesting.
They amped up the search efforts in this area. They had more than 100 officers on the ground. They had helicopters in the air. They had bloodhounds sniffing things out. And despite all this, Dennis and Lancaster got away. I don't understand how they're this good at getting away. They just disappear. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense.
They went to a crossroad in Louisiana and they made a deal with the devil or something to escape law enforcement. That's the only thing I can think of because it makes no sense that repeatedly they just get lucky. I just don't get that.
So then a few days later, imagine that, just like 2 more days later.
Just 2 more days.
On Monday, May 22nd, they sadly would take another victim. Stacy Beavers, who was a 68-year-old retired school teacher, was returning from a women's club meeting at her church in Cuba, Alabama. When she arrived home and she was trying to unlock her front door, she was attacked from behind. Dennis and Lancaster hit her on the head and then shot her behind the ear. They stole her keys, grabbed the plate of food that she had brought home from her meeting, and took off in her car.
It's just so unnecessary to kill these people.
So that's exactly what I'm saying. I mean, like, this is a 68-year-old woman. Like, if you had held her at gunpoint and asked for her keys and her plate of food, she would have willingly handed it over to you. And it would have been fine, too, because, I mean, like, and I know that they don't probably in the moment think through this that logically, but, like, they take her keys and it has her house key and her car keys, so she's locked out of her house. It's going to be a minute before she can get into her house or call for help or go find a neighbor or whatever. You know, it's like, I can see that maybe they kill people so that they don't leave a trail. But a lot of the time, it
But
doesn't
it
make a
does leave a
difference. Like, they
trail.
kill people and it's found just as
Yeah.
soon.
And then they
Exactly.
attribute it to them. It doesn't give them that much extra time because they know where they are.
No.
Because they
No.
kill
I
people.
honestly just
They're
think
just
they
leaving
killed
bodies
people
everywhere.
just to kill them. Yeah.
If you're gonna kill people, you have to try and cover up the murder if you don't want to leave a trail. Otherwise, you're just leaving bodies everywhere. And that's not any
Exactly.
better than just stealing cars and having witnesses left behind. It's the same thing,
Exactly.
except
Yep.
worse.
Luckily, Stacy's body was discovered just the next day, and it was because concerned relatives hadn't heard from her. At this point in the investigation, the FBI had also become involved in the case, and they're still not having any luck until Friday, May 26th, when this hunt will come to a final end. So, at the beginning of the end starts at a home of a rancher named Russell Washington who lives in Caddo, Alabama. And he's coming home from his parents' house. He's walking up to the house. He's got a ranch hand with him, and his dog starts freaking out, acting as if like there's somebody inside the house that shouldn't be there. And so Russell must have had some trust in this dog because he finds a rifle before he goes into the house, and then he goes in to investigate with his farmhand. And they go into the living room, and lo and behold, they find Dennis and Lancaster in their house.
Just like sitting in the living room, lounging.
Actually, they had made themselves at home and was like eating a sandwich in his kitchen. And then had heard them and had like come over and yeah. Yeah.
What oh, that's ridiculous. People
Yep.
that can make themselves at home in a home that they're invading the space of are just nuts. That is
Yeah.
bonkers to me.
No,
Okay.
it was just like chill. There was like no stress to them. They're like, yeah, we're just gonna eat a sandwich and wait for him to come home.
I'm just
No
gonna eat
biggie.
this man's literal food and just chill, drink a beer on the
Mm-hmm.
couch, just
Yeah.
have a relaxing afternoon in somebody else's house.
I know.
Okay.
It
All right.
bonkers. It bonkers my mind.
It bonkers me.
So the convicts take the two men at gunpoint and tell them to lie spread eagle on the floor. They tie them up with electrical cord, and then they go back to eating their meal. They just leave them there on the floor. And they kind of make conversation with Russell. And Dennis kind of looks at Russell, and he's like, I'll bet you don't remember, but you let me come hunting on your place one time. And Russell was like, yeah, I remember you, like, they had hunted doves on his property, like, just a few years before.
That's why they went to his house,
Yeah.
because they'd been there before, or he
Yeah,
at least one of them
basically.
had.
Dennis told him that he wasn't going to kill him because he knew that Russell was a family man and a hardworking, good old boy.
These people are
What?
psychotic.
They're straight up not okay. I don't know. So then Russell, he manages to keep a conversation going about like hunting and stuff because he's trying to keep him preoccupied. He figures like if he can kind of buddy up, maybe they really won't kill him because
It's a good call.
they tied him up and they've killed everybody else. And then during this conversation, Dennis brings up their killing spree, and he says in his own words, quote, he says, people make you kill them. They know you've got a gun on them, and then they try to get away.
None of these people tried to get away from him. He just
I
shot
don't.
them while they were doing what he asked.
Even if they do run and try to get away, of course they're going to try to get away. They're trying to save their
You're
life.
trying to kill them.
You dumb Dumbo? Whatever.
You dumb Dumbo.
Yeah, all these people, they leave me speechless. I don't have good insults for them. They're too much. So, once they finish, taking their sweet time eating their sandwiches, they take some food and money from the house, and then Russell's pickup, of course, and they take off. Luckily, they leave Russell and the ranch hand unharmed, and Russell, being Russell, the good man he is, the good old boy,
Good old boy.
as it was said, he immediately gets out of his electrical cord bonds and calls the police. And for the first time in the investigation, they have like real-time information about where these two are. And these police did not hesitate. They acted fast. They, within a few minutes, had roadblocks up. They had tons of policemen out on the street just surveilling and trying to find them. And they took resources from everywhere, like policemen that normally have like different jobs and are not out on the streets. They put them out in patrol cars. Like they have everybody on hand trying to find these two, which makes sense because at this point they have killed what, 8 people. So
It's insane.
and in like a 3-week time period, they've killed 8 people. Within a few minutes, they get kind of blocked in by the police. And so Dennis and Lancaster, they get out of the car and they start open firing on the officers. Troopers Houston Summers and Billy Young are both killed. They are the first two on the scene, and the only two at this point. There's just one cop car that blocks them in. These are the 2 men in there, and they both get killed by Dennis and
Ugh.
Lancaster. Luckily, before Summers was shot at point blank range, he was able to radio the station and let them know what had happened. But that's like really, it creates such a haunting image in my mind. Like this police officer, which by the way, he's like in his 60s, really like I'll talk about it later, but he's been on the force for 30 plus years. And he's gets gunned down by these psychopaths, and then his last dying breath, he's like trying to alert
Keep
the police of, yeah,
doing his job.
and then they kill him at point blank range. So really courageous men. At this point, the highway patrol airplane is dispatched and goes directly to the scene, and they're able to locate Dennis and Lancaster as they hit the road again. They direct the patrolmen on the ground to their location, and what ends up happening is Dennis and Lancaster basically, I don't know how much detail they have, but they know that the police are hot on their trail. And so they end up just driving into the driveway of a woman's house. Her name was Christine Slacks. And they like sat in the driveway and waited as the patrol car drives up. And they just shoot at the police officers as they come up. And sadly, they kill another police officer. His name was James Grimes. But luckily, the second officer, Hoyt Hughes, that was also in the car, he was able to return fire and call for backup. The shooting lasted for a total of 3 minutes, and by the end of it, both Dennis and Lancaster were both dead. Their killing spree had finally been ended.
Oh my
And at the
goodness.
end, after the 3 officers they had taken their lives that day, they had 11 victims. Luckily, Officer Hughes survived with just a wound in his arm.
That is insane.
So investigators tried to figure out where Dennis and Lancaster were headed this whole time. They could only guess that they were probably trying to kill Dennis's wife and children because they lived in this city where this took place in Caddo. And I guess earlier Dennis, I think when he was like originally arrested, Dennis had basically like threatened that he was going to go kill his wife and her children, which I think it sounds like they weren't his kids. They were somebody else's, but so they believe that that's probably where they were headed first, was to Caddo to go kill them.
That is crazy to me that like it's like almost like that was his purpose in breaking out of prison in the first place, was just so that he could go and kill his wife, his ex-wife.
Yeah, and for all we know, maybe it was. It seems insane to me that they would like even break out of prison in the first place because like obviously from the start they didn't want, like they had no intention of being actually set free because they didn't go into hiding. It's not like they got out and just like laid low. They had a death warrant for themselves basically and just didn't care. But obviously they had a mission.
With the way they were doing things, yeah, they were like, they could have, instead of going to Alabama, they could have just driven south. Mexico's right there. They would have been home free.
Yeah.
Probably not home free, but like they could have done what they'd been doing and just kill a bunch of people, get through the border, and then they would have been fine.
Yep. nobody would have ever found him.
But they
But
didn't do
that
that.
doesn't seem to be what they wanted
Their
to do.
goal
Yeah.
wasn't to survive, really. It was to just create chaos and kill Dennis's ex-wife.
Yeah. After the whole incident, Christine Slacks, who was the woman where this final shootout took place in her driveway, which can you imagine? I cannot. She actually wasn't home at the time, though, luckily.
She probably
Or
would
else
have
she
died if she
might have
had
been
been.
caught in the crossfire. Yeah, she actually, like, at the time the shooting was happening, she got, like, a phone call from her neighbor who was like, you won't believe what's happening in your driveway right now.
Oh
Can you
my goodness.
imagine? So, anyway, when this woman, Christine Slack, was interviewed, this is what she said surrounding that time when the convicts were escaped. She said, "We couldn't go anywhere without running into a roadblock. People slept with guns who had never slept with them before. Everyone was apprehensive. And we just thank the Lord that there was no worse than it was."
Yeah, I mean, you'd count yourself lucky to not be in these people's warpath.
Yeah. And, like, you can imagine that if those officers hadn't made the sacrifice that they made, there probably would have been an incredible amount of victims by the end of their
Yeah, that's
spree.
true.
So, to this day, Christine Slack, just an interesting side note, she, at the time of that shootout, she had a boat parked out on her front, like, house, out in front of her house. Thank you for words. And it got obviously riddled with bullets from the shootout, and she left it there. Like, it's still, like, sitting out on her driveway. And from time to time, like, she gets passerbys that will come ask questions about that day and, like, what happened. And anyway, it's kind of interesting.
That's kind of interesting. I
It's
probably
like,
wouldn't do that, but that's kind of
I
funny.
don't know if I'd leave it there. But I'm sure she can't sell it, you know, it's useless at that point. If she could
Yeah,
take it to
it's
the
true.
junkyard.
It's got
But
bullet holes in it.
in the next few days, a memorial would be held to honor the 3 officers that sacrificed their lives to stop these monsters from continuing their spree. And I'm just going to take a minute and talk a little bit about those 3 people. Houston Summers, that was the guy I mentioned, was and he's in his 60s. He was called Pappy by those who knew him, and when he was killed, he was 62 years old. And at the time of the shootout, he was a member of the Motor Inspection Division. And like I said, like, they called in all forces, right? And he would not usually have been assigned to something like this. He'd served his time, and he was kind of doing, like, the down low stuff at this point. But because of Dennis and Lancaster and the danger they posed, he courageously went out there and sacrificed himself to stop them. He had been serving for 32 years, and he was said by people, they described him as hard but fair, and was a well remembered and loved person in their community. So, the second trooper that gave his life was Billy G. Young, and he was 50 at the time. He had been working there for 23 years. He had a son, Bob Young, who, when interviewed, told a story that he remembered about his dad. And his dad had invited a local reporter to do a ride along with him for this 8-hour shift. And just to show, like, how hardworking this guy was, he'd already worked a 9-hour shift, like, back to back with that. And so on that Friday night, apparently there was, like, some sports games going on, and there was a ton of traffic around this place in their city. His son said that the last car they had come in contact with was a couple from Texas, and that they were really mad that they got pulled over. And he said that his dad had stayed with the driver after he wrote him his $20 ticket. But by the time that his dad left them, they were laughing and on good terms. And he said that's how his dad was with people. And then the final officer to lose his life that day was James Grimes, and he was only 37 years old. Couldn't find a whole ton about him, but he was a lieutenant and had worked really hard in the law enforcement because he'd only been there for 12 years. He did leave behind a wife and a 3-year-old daughter. And so that always super bums me out when you hear about young families being left behind. But once again, I think everybody can speak for the fact that, like, obviously what he sacrificed was worth it and appreciated, because there was no other way that these men were going to be stopped. In 2018, just a few years ago, A new monument was placed in Caddo to honor these 3 men that had given their lives. They still very much remember these men and the sacrifice that they made, and they will forever be a legend in history, as they should be. So there's really
Yeah.
stories like this that, like, I know that for some, like, the whole law enforcement thing and police thing is, like, you know, controversial. But I feel like it's stories like these that, like, make you remember why we have law enforcement agents around, because nobody else is stepping up to stop psycho people like this, like nobody else is going to step up
Yeah.
to do that. And just, like, I don't know, like, in my opinion, you can go to any job in the world and you can find good people and bad people to do that job. And this, to me, goes to show you can't stereotype all cops just because, yeah, there are some bad cops out there, but there's also people that give their lives to save other people. And so at the end of this story, there's that heartfelt, like, these people sacrifice their lives, and that's incredible.
It really is. They sound like really good men. Like they were just good people in their community, willing to do scary things to save people's lives, and that's what we need. We need people like that. Help
I agree.
protect people from crazy psychos who steal cars every 48 hours and kill
And
people
kill
for them.
people. Can you imagine? For some reason, I cannot imagine that, like, Lancaster was 25 years old. He had been in and out of prison like 4 or 5 times and killed 11 people, and he was 25 years old.
Yeah, that's younger than me. I can't
And I
imagine that.
don't Yeah, and I don't know a lot about his backstory, but I know that his body was actually, like, unclaimed.
He didn't have any family or friends
Apparently not.
willing to step up
Nobody
and
that cared enough to claim him after he died.
that is
Which, like, I
pretty
don't
sad,
feel
even though
sorry for
he's a
him,
monster.
but it lends to, probably, I'm sure he had some kind of a really rough upbringing that lent to his insane behaviors.
Well, and it kind of
So,
seems like he got caught up in Dennis's vendetta. Like it wasn't
yeah,
really his revenge plan or whatever. It was like he saw an
no,
opportunity to escape, kind of was along for the ride while Dennis kind of called the shots and stuff. At least that's how it
yeah,
seemed.
it seems like it, but also Lancaster often seems to be the one that, like, dealt the violence too.
He's the one that like killed
That
people.
did a lot. Like, he was always the one that went into the gas stations and, like, just killed people with no remorse, And so it's kind
My
of
goodness.
whoever he was, and whether or not it was his revenge fueling it, he was definitely an equal partner.
Yeah, it the go listen to the radio rental episode with this
Episode
story kind of as a
63.
part of it. But it's crazy because there were other people that like came in contact with these people and not came in contact with them but like saw them and had the good sense to skedaddle the other direction
Yeah.
so that they
Yeah.
wouldn't get hurt.
It's the second part of episode 63. They tell 2 stories in that episode, and it was the second episode in there. So if you go listen to it and you're like, this has nothing to do with that, that's because it's at the end. But yes,
It's
it's
true.
about a close call with these 2 men. So go check it out if you want that, like, firsthand account of the terror that these terrible human beings inspired.
Exactly. Do it.
Now you've heard one of the worst killing sprees ever that never gets talked about.
Yeah. I'd never heard of it before. It was very interesting to hear about.
Thanks for tuning in this week.
Yeah. Follow us on social media. We're on Instagram at forcrimingoutloud_podcast. We're on Twitter at crimingoutloud. We have an email. It's forcrimingoutloud@gmail.com. We have a website, forcrimingoutloud.com. Find us wherever. Follow us. Share us. You're all wonderful. Have a great week.